Hi, everyone. My name is Desi Rios, and I decided to choose feminist rhetoric as my topic for the project. Okay. Key questions. These are just something to keep in mind as I'm going through my slides. I'm not necessarily going to be touching every single one of them, but just keep these in mind if you want to go along in the chapter with me. On the bottom, it says it's all in chapter 8. Most of the answers to these questions are, and I will be touching on just some of the few key topics from chapter 8. Do women use different rhetoric techniques than men? Should female rhetorics be judged differently than males? Are women experiences different from men's? And if so, how might they affect their rhetoric? What do women and other scholars contribute to rhetorical theory? And again, all these questions are addressed in chapter 8. Women in history. I don't think it's right if I do a feminist rhetoric PowerPoint without discussing a little bit of the history at least. Again, another portion of history that I didn't discuss in this is the women's rights movement, which is very crucial. And there was just a lot of information. So for time's sake, it's in chapter 8. But women have participated in political rhetoric for decades. A lot of people don't know this or don't take it into account when they're thinking about rhetoric. But we go as far back as 51 BC when Cleopatra ascended from the Egyptian throne. And since then, there's been nothing but great women leaders throughout the world. We have continued to see such great leaders from different queens, prime ministers, and powerful CEOs taking over the United States. We have even coined the term nowadays, girl boss. I don't know if you guys see it all over your feed. Women in STEM, women in construction, women doing all different kinds of things, becoming CEOs, and that's a great thing. And we're evolving so much. When discussing early rhetoric, it is no secret that it's predominantly male and based on male experiences. We saw this in class when discussing the ancient Greek and Roman civilizations. Male landowners were only recognized. We saw this when discussing Aristotle, Socrates. I don't think we ever coined a woman's name in class that I remember of. I might have just I've decided to flip the script for my presentation and see where women stand in this dragged out debate of rhetoric and why we're excluded and what are we going to do about it. Why women are being excluded. This is a lot of feminist questions and it hasn't been answered for many decades, but I believe in the textbook it gave a pretty straightforward answer. Women face stiffer standards than men when their rhetoric is analyzed and criticized. A lot of men just do not take women rhetoric seriously. And a reason for that probably is women have no parallel rhetorical history. It's not really documented. It hasn't been written down, even though we know it's been happening. Um, we've just been silenced. People have different definitions nowadays of what a woman is. I feel like we see that a lot in our culture in the 20th century, 21st century, sorry, of what feminist means and why we should be involved. Women's work is not considered successful by male standards. It's by these set of ideals that's been laid out for us from men dating all the way back to Aristotle, Socrates, etc. And yeah, a really interesting point I found in chapter 8 was the topic of feminine style. Campbell was very prominent within this chapter, so I suggest reading more up about him. Campbell's definition emerged out of their experiences as women and was adapted to the attitudes and experiences of female audiences. Feminine style, excuse the dogs. Feminine style is based on everyday women experiences such as childbearing, crafts, cooking, etc. Dawanton also stated within the chapter, stated that women's socialization has changed the game completely. We are not doing the same duties as women in the 1800s. And I mean, it's a whole different time now, stating that the feminist style includes the use of narratives, concrete examples, analogies, and anecdotes as primary evidence for claims. Why women are more likely to tell stories, why we are more likely to be relatable. Also, women are less likely to use statistics, deductive reasoning, as one normally would as evidence. We see this a lot from a political standpoint. I mean, we see it in Congress whenever, if you guys ever do politics, they use statistics, deductive reasoning, straightforward examples when women kind of like to make their own. I don't really know if I stated that pretty well, as well as more open and offer their perspective to the audience. Right? The gender diversity movement is a great example, I think, of the many different perspectives of feminist rhetoric. You can also go see in the chapter, there is a big old table and it lists all the different kinds of themes of feminist rhetoric. And I would have loved to copy and paste it in here, but I wasn't sure how. So I suggest you go to check that out. I mean, it's great. And it gives you so many different perspectives of how people take this topic. All right. The gender diversity movement, developed by Condit to be compatible with different feminist projects and ideologies, and at the same time distinguish between rhetoric and communication, which can often get mixed up when discussing this topic. And she said a central component of Conduit's theory is that there are multiple genders, not just two. And she explained that gender is culturally constructed, and disrupting the traditional categories of male and female is a useful way to liberate women from the structures of oppression that have historically been assigned to the category women. And the first step when studying a theory of gendered rhetoric is to erase the idea that gender is split along a male and female line. She decided to break that barrier completely. Right? Continue. Condit asserted that a gender diversity perspective would thus encourage us to go beyond the observation that rhetoric historically has been practiced primarily by males to explore the multiplicity and contradictions of gendering of the practice. I put this one in bold because I thought it was a great line and it kind of defined the whole thing. Rhetoric constructs gender, not gender constructing rhetoric. That's what Condit thinks. Condit also believes that eloquence played a big role when it came to employing rhetoric. She wanted to install some specific guidelines because this can kind of get blurry as you dive more into it. She said, appreciating multiple sets of fluid criteria for judging rhetorers, seeing rhetorers not as an all powerful father figure, and disentangle social structure to make it more egalitarian. Keeping women in the foreground. There are a few characteristics that have a hand in oppressing women, and for time's sake, I'm not going to list them all in the PowerPoint. You can see them in chapter 8. I believe they're on page 203 to 204, but a couple of them is ritualistic violence, silencing women's voices, fixing women's images, refusing to see the problem, reversal, and elementary terms. I mean, you can kind of get an idea of what all of that means just by looking at the PowerPoint alone. Yeah, but we've been oppressed for decades, and I believe these characteristics really play a role into, sorry, it's my turn, into playing a role into what makes us us and what made us who we are today. Now I'm going to go back and touch base on the main questions that I have. Do women use different rhetoric techniques than men? Yes, it really depends on the standpoint that you look at it from, but I believe women use it because we were just raised differently and we were built differently. So of course we're going to take it in our own interpretation. Should female rhetorics be judged differently than males? It's up to you. Some of the different ideals within the chapter said yes. Some of them said no, because that's what makes us human. And why are you going to do rhetoric and not take women into account? I mean, that's just not right, according to some people. Are women experiences different from men? Yes. I mean, I feel like if you look back in the earlier days, when you're looking at early rhetoric, it very much is so. But nowadays, it might not be as different. But I believe if we're looking early rhetoric, yes, very much so. And it affects their rhetoric by how they use the different techniques and how eloquent they are in talking about the techniques and using them within their own lifestyle. What do women and other scholars contribute to the rhetorical theory? I believe they contribute a whole new different perspective. I mean, you even saw if you looked at that table, there's so many different themes that, especially ones that we didn't even talk about in class. So I believe that it's worth going in and looking into. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Thank y'all.